one of my favorite TV shows came from the Law & Order franchise. Unfortunately, it was the shortest running show of the series, but it was Law & Order: Criminal Intent. And every episode, it began with a cold open. And so as viewers, we were just plopped right into the middle of the story before opening credits even began to roll. And what I loved about this show was how it focused on the motive or the intention behind the crime. And sometimes the cold open, it would reveal the crime and it would reveal who did it. But then we'd be shown these scenes that cast doubt. How could this person have done it? Their actions didn't seem to line up with their character. Other times the cold open, it would reveal the crime, but not who did it. And so we'd be fed scenes, little bits and pieces of different suspects' lives, and we would have to try to figure out, okay, so which one of them did it? And what I loved about this show is often it kept me guessing right up until the end. But then I'd get to the end and I could see, oh yeah, this is where all those carefully laid out clues were pointing me to all along. Sometimes as the viewer, I could see that the guilty person, they were showing who they were all along. The clues that were being laid out, it was consistent with their character. But the people in their lives, they didn't want to see it because they didn't like the implications. But other times I kind of felt sorry for the guilty person because it seemed like they just got caught up in this out of control spiral of events that ended up changing the entire course of their lives. We have followed the trial that John has laid out for us in his gospel, and we've been looking at the evidence. Does it point to the fact that Jesus is who he has been saying that he is, the Messiah, God? And so we've glimpsed bits and pieces of his life. His character has been revealed to us. And so on this final night, on the night that Jesus knew he was going to be arrested because he was going to be arrested for the crime of claiming to be God. On this night, John zooms in really close on Jesus's words and actions with the people who were closest to him. And everything that Jesus said and did on this night, it was grounded in love. And it was grounded in knowing that the hour had come for him to depart from this world and to return to his Father through the suffering of the cross. And he knew this is how he was going to show these people that he had poured the last 3 years into. This is how he was going to show them a love that endured to the end. And I feel like no matter how many times I read John 13 to 17, and I read them and I remind myself, this is what Jesus is teaching them on the night that he knows he's going to the cross. This profound lesson in love. And every single time it kind of blows my mind because I'm like, he's facing the cross. Jesus knows that this is the night he's going to endure more suffering than we can even comprehend. And I feel like I can't even imagine being able to string together one coherent sentence, never mind an entire and profound lesson on love. And in the middle of this study, in the middle of writing this study, I had to undergo what was considered major surgery. And the whole day before my surgery, and I was going to be knocked out cold, right? It's not like I was laying on the operating table knowing what was going on. But that whole day before the surgery, I think my most repeated sentence was, like, I seriously don't know what you're saying to me right now. I just can't think. And I was even more scattered the morning of the surgery. And so I felt like the only important piece of information that I could pull together in my head and share with everybody that I encountered at the hospital was that my brother is a nurse at this hospital. And I made sure they knew his name. I made sure that they knew what unit he worked on. And I made really sure that they knew he was working this shift. Like, he is here, he is in the building. And my thought process behind this was, like, if things go really, really wrong, I want them to remember this. And maybe they'll call Doug and he's going to come running. And because of the relationship that we have, he's going to make sure that I get the best care possible. And so, unfortunately for my brother, this was also the first thing that I remembered when I came out of anesthetic. And so, my brother's very busy hospital shift was interrupted by me. His sister, his very groggy sister, demanding that he come to me as soon as possible. Jesus, on this night that we've been studying all week, he is facing suffering that on a human physical level can't even imagine. But he is also facing deep suffering on a spiritual level because he knows that he is going to carry the darkest, the heaviest burden of all time, because he will be carrying the weight of our sin. Our sin, which is the reason that we are separated from God, he was going to carry it. And so for a time, he would be separated from his Father. And so on this night, the night that he's going to be betrayed, we're looking at Jesus's words and his actions carefully, and we can see that it is so clear he was not swept up by the unpredictable actions of a raging mob. He was not the unfortunate recipient of bad luck, wrong place, wrong time, poor you. We see that at the end of John chapter 11 and the beginning of John chapter 12, it says that Jesus, he went towards Jerusalem during the Passover, knowing about the plot to kill him and knowing that the hour of his exaltation on the cross, it had come. And so knowing what was about to happen, Jesus, he carefully, he patiently, he lovingly prepared his own. And he taught them in advance of this coming sign because he knew it was going to profoundly shake their confidence before it blew open their understanding. Nothing about this night was beyond his plan or beyond his ability to control. And we know from TV and movies that premeditation, it brings with it a heavy weight of responsibility. And so when we look, we see every word, every deed of Jesus, it was premeditated that night of his arrest. And if it seems like I'm belaboring the point and you're like, yep, we get it. You said it in the homework and you said it a couple times now. It's because it's important. And do you remember last week where we looked at Paul when he was telling the church in Corinth that if Jesus just died as a criminal, or if he was just a victim of Rome's injustice, if that's all that happened, then eat and drink because tomorrow you're going to die and you really and truly have no hope. If Jesus was a kind man and he was full of love and he was full of grace, but he wasn't powerful enough to prevent his own death, then he might be worthy of our admiration, but he is not worthy of our allegiance or our devotion to him as Lord and King because he doesn't have the power to fulfill that role. But if Jesus was consumed with love and with grace, and that's why he chose to walk willingly and purposefully towards the cross as the Passover lamb, as the one whose death would be the substitute for ours, wouldn't that turn the whole trial on its head? Wouldn't it establish Jesus's intention and his motivation? And wouldn't it seem to proclaim that every word and every deed, every action, every sign, all of it, it was premeditated for a specific purpose? And when they're charged with a crime, and investigators go digging around in their past and they see, man, there is a pretty consistent and long-running pattern in their life. They're like, score. This is going to be a really easy case to try because everything is pointing to what happened. And we see that on this final night before Jesus's trial, he's washed the feet of men who they walked beside him for 3 solid years. And he patiently taught them and retaught them the same lessons. But they were slow to learn. And he washed the feet of a man who said that I'm willing to die for you. And Jesus says, no, you're actually going to betray me. But Jesus knew all of this and he washed Peter's feet. He washed the feet of the man who had walked beside him for 3 years. but somehow he wasn't drawn to him. And so he was willing to take bread out of Jesus' hand and then turn and leave and betray him for just a little bit of money. So on this final night, these men, Jesus and his disciples, they've eaten together and Jesus has washed their feet. He's told them some of what's going to happen and why it's going to happen. And then he assures them, this is what you can know for sure. This is what you can hold on to. And then we get to the end of John chapter 14, and Jesus says, rise, let's go from here. And so it's likely that at this point, Jesus and his disciples, they get up from the table in the upper room and they start walking towards Gethsemane. And on the way, did they pass by or through some vineyards? Probably. Did they walk past the temple? Yeah, there's a really good chance that they did. And scholars say they wonder if, as Jesus was walking past the temple, he pointed to the temple gates, which would have had a golden grapevine with grape clusters that were as big as a grown man hanging off of it. This is what was above the temple gate. And they wonder, did Jesus point to this when he started to speak the words of John 15? So let's see what Jesus is saying now in John chapter 15, and we're going to start at verse 1. And Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it can bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You didn't choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another. So Jesus, he starts by saying that he is the true vine. So what's he referring to? Even if they weren't walking by or through a vineyard, even if they weren't walking past the temple and they never saw that temple gate with its big golden grapevine, what made Jesus say that he was the true vine? We know that Jesus was intentional in using this metaphor to teach his disciples on their last night together. And so to help you understand why Jesus used this metaphor to teach them, I'd like to share a song with you. And don't worry, I'm not going to sing it, even if my singing wasn't scary, which it kind of is. I don't know the tune of this song. But it's a song from Isaiah chapter 5, and it's called the Song of the Vineyard. And we're going to read just the first 7 verses, and I'm going to be reading it from the NIV. And it says, I, which is Isaiah, will sing a song for the one I love, and that's Yahweh, the God of Israel, a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up, and he cleared it of stones, and he planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it, and he cut out a winepress as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. And so now the perspective is going to change from Isaiah's to God's. And it says, "Now you dwellers in Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done for my vineyard than I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I will tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I will break down its wall, and it'll be trampled. I will make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated, and briars and thorns will grow there. And I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. And he looked for justice, but he saw bloodshed, and for righteousness, but he heard cries of distress." The nation of Israel, that was God's vineyard. And it was a vineyard that God cared for to make sure that it would be fruitful. And the whole point of a vineyard is to grow vines, which will produce fruit, which can be harvested and enjoyed. But instead of growing good fruit, God's vineyard, it grew sour or stinking grapes. Israel had failed as the vineyard of God. And maybe we remember Jesus's first sign. That was done at the wedding in Cana, where he turned the water into wine. And with that sign, Jesus, he was pointing to the fact that the old wine from the covenant of the law, it had done its work of preparation, and now the new wine was coming. And this was going to be wine that was taken from different grapes that were taken from a different vineyard. This was going to be the wine of the new covenant of grace, not of the law. And so just like the symbolism behind all those different feasts, it was pointing the Jews towards their ultimate fulfillment in Christ. Just like the temple was pointing them to Christ. This is the meeting place now between God and man. In the same way, the metaphor of the vineyard, it was pointing to Jesus. Jesus was the one who was going to bring justice and righteousness and salvation. It was going to come to the whole world, not just Israel, through him. And so the true vine, it wasn't Israel. It is not the church. It's Jesus Christ, the vine that is under the Father's care. But caring for a vineyard, ensuring that it's going to be fruitful, it involves pruning. And so God, he's going to cut away the dead branches that don't bear fruit. And then the ones that do bear fruit, he's going to prune them so that they can grow even more fruit. And we are going to see examples of that in both Judas and Peter. Judas was the branch that looked for a time like it was abiding, and maybe it even looked like there was fruit, but it wasn't fruit that lasted. And so his branch was going to be cut off. Peter was the branch that he produced some fruit. The first thing that comes to mind is when he confessed Jesus to be the Christ, when he said, "Where else can we go if you have the words of salvation?" That was fruit that came from abiding in the true vine. But we are going to see that to bear more fruit, Peter is going to have to be pruned. He is going to deny Jesus. And Jesus, he's ultimately going to restore Peter. But there is going to be some pruning first, and it has to happen. It has to happen so that Peter can go on to become that powerful leader in the early church that we'll see if we keep reading into the book of Acts. But in the same way that Jesus was preparing his followers in advance for his death on the cross, he's now preparing his followers in advance for this pruning that it's inevitably going to happen. And he's showing them that it is the only way that they can bear lasting fruit. And so Jesus, on this last night that they're together, he's teaching his disciples an important and a needful lesson in abiding. They have to know so that the fruit is going to grow and so that the world will see it show. And so what did they need to know? To answer that, we need to look at Jesus. And what did he know? Well, first of all, he knew what time it was. His human body, this very night, it was going to be subjected to the pain of human frailty. But Jesus, he carried in himself all the power and all the fullness of God. He could have called 10,000 angels, and with one single spoken word, every created being would have had to respond. But Jesus knew what night it was on the kingdom calendar. And so he knew the timeline of his exaltation in power and in glory. It was going to follow a different path and a different schedule than anybody expected. So knowing what time it was on the kingdom calendar, he submitted his timeline to his Father's plan. So Jesus knew what time it was. He also knew where he was going and how he was going to get there. He was going back to his Father, back to the Father he had loved and obeyed, the one that he was eager to glorify in and through his return. And he knew that the way he was going to get there was through the cross. Jesus, he also knew why he was going. He was going to bring glory to his Father and to fulfill his purpose as the founder of salvation, who was going to bring many to glory. And so because Jesus knew who he was, Jesus knew his purpose. And so he knew what to do and why to do it. He knew what to do before he left. He had to get his disciples ready. He had to teach them, and he had to prepare the people that he had chosen for this very purpose. And so our first lesson in abiding is we have to understand what we know. What's our place? What's our position? We're not the vine. We're not the vine dresser. We're the branches. And so it's not our job to cut things off. It's not our job to prune. And it's not our job to try to hold all the branches together. Our job is to abide, to remain firmly anchored in the true vine. So how do we do that? We nestle into the intimacy of relationship with the true vine. We get to know his words because that's how we get to know him. And then we make space for his words to abide in us, and we obey them. So it sounds pretty easy, right? I don't know how many times I've read John 15 over the course of my life, but it would be a lot of times. And something that has always stood out to me about this chapter is it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of difficult concepts or complex imagery that we need to understand. We don't have to mine super hard or super deep to get to the meaning of this passage. But once again, we see that while it may not be super hard to understand, it's going to be a lot harder to live. Because abiding in him means relationship. And relationship means time. Time to get to know his words because they reveal who he is. Time to chew on those words so that we can uncover their meaning. And then time to consider, if that's what he said, and this is what it means, what are the implications for my life? What is it going to change about me and how I live? And it's one thing to come to our aha moment, that moment when the light comes on, but it's another thing to walk in that light and to live out the implications of having seen the light. And I'm not super old and I'm not super wise, but it seems to me like most often the implications of Jesus's words, they are lived out in the small, mundane, day-to-day stuff. In the middle of laundry piles that reproduce, dirty dishes that seems like they regurgitate, and to-do lists that I think they regenerate sometimes. And that's just the stuff. What about the dirty, hungry people who keep us busy both literally and metaphorically? What about the people who are on our to-do list or the people who maybe are our to-do lists? And by the way, I don't think it's ever a great idea to make people your to-do list. I've learned that one from experience. But how do we abide alongside them? And again, I think the answer is easier than we probably would like it to be. We abide in these things and with these people by clinging to the vine, by understanding what we know, what's our place, what's our position. We're not the vine. We're not the vine dresser. What's our place on the kingdom calendar? And I don't mean like specifically, but big picture. Christ has died, he is risen, and he will come again. And until then, we abide. When he comes, we're going to get where we're going, and we're going to see and know fully that even though the path led through suffering, it's going to be to the glory of God. And Jesus, he gave this lesson on abiding while he was standing on the cusp of a massive crisis. But he gave it using an image that would have been commonplace from their everyday life. And I can't help but wonder, is that part of the lesson of abiding? Do we stay connected to the true vine during the mundane, everyday, just boring stuff, and grow stronger as we cling to the vine, grow deeper in our relationship with him? And then when the big stuff comes, when the crisis hits, even though we might start shaking, we will be fundamentally unshaken because we are abiding in the vine. We know what we know. And maybe we don't understand it fully, but what we know it's enough to get us where we're going. And we know that abiding in Christ, it'll be the only way that we can bear fruit that will last into eternity. And if you drive through any town, any city, you'll see buildings and streets that are named after people, some who have been long gone. And it looks like, you know what? They must have accomplished something of lasting value. But time, it's relative. And something that lasts hundreds, maybe even thousands of years here on earth, if it doesn't last through eternity, it's going to seem like nothing but a speck on the landscape of time. From the perspective of eternity, building a name for yourself doesn't seem like a lasting endeavor. And people who abide, they're not worried about building names for themselves. They're farsighted. They are looking forward to a reality that they can't see yet, but they know that it's coming. And they know that their own glory, it means nothing in the face of God's glory. And I prepared this teaching session while I was staying at a vacation rental on the ocean. And if that conjures up for you a picture of warm ocean breezes and soft sand and a cute little beach cabin rental, just toss that image. Because I was staying on the cold northern Pacific Ocean. I was surrounded by rocky crags, and I was staying in a kind of a tough, hard-living fishing village. And it was ruggedly beautiful, but it wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't even particularly comfortable. And our family was staying with another family, and so I spent many of the days with this woman that I've known her for decades. And she's pretty quiet, she's very hardworking, and she's just one of those behind the scenes kind of people who maybe she isn't noticed by many, but she's someone whose diligent work, it impacts the lives of a lot of people. And she is a quiet abider. Year in and year out, she washes dishes and clothes, and morning after morning, she gets her people ready to face the day, and then she goes to her job. And most of her days, they're pretty unspectacular. She just carries out mundane, often thankless tasks. Most of what she did yesterday, she's going to have to do again tomorrow. And so one of these days when I was feeling a little bit discouraged about my own somewhat monotonous existence, I asked her, what keeps you going day after day? What do you rely on to get up in the morning and do what you did yesterday all over again and again? And her answer, it humbled me, and she said, because it's not about me. And did she sometimes wish that following God was easier and maybe a little bit more fun, for lack of a better word? Yeah. But to the bottom of her soul, she knew what she knew. God is God, and she isn't. And so she said, I will go to bed tonight, tired from what I did today, and I'll get up in the morning and I'll do it again tomorrow because it's not about me and I know what is true. That is abiding. And as I sat and reflected on the wisdom of her response, I recognized the error of my own, because if I'm honest, and I know I sound selfish admitting this, but I want my life to look more like just John 15:11, the fullness of joy. I want that lived out and in and through me, but my reaction, it shows that I don't really understand the true meaning of joy. Do I think that to have the fullness of joy, I need to have my needs met just the way I think that they should be met? Do I need to have my wants met in the timing and the quantity that I think they should be met? And do I want all of this so I can broadcast my good fortune to audience as big as I think I deserve? Maybe. Maybe living in a world where seeing the best of other people's accomplishments constantly held up in front of me as the benchmark that maybe I should be aspiring to, maybe it makes me think that I have to have it all just to have joy. But we only need to read the headlines, like real news headlines, gossip, celebrity headlines. We only need to read them to see that having it all, or at least having access to it all, that doesn't bring the fullness of joy either. And so what does that mean? Do we just resign ourselves to living unhappy lives until heaven and then that's where we get the joy? No, but if Jesus is the true vine, and if abiding in him is how we experience fullness of joy, then the fullness of it is only going to come when we know him fully, like we have been fully known. And that's what Paul is referring to in 1 Corinthians 13, in that chapter that's so commonly known as the love chapter. Now we see dimly, like through a mirror, and just like their mirrors weren't as sharp and as clear as our mirrors. It really was more dimly back then. But our experiences, they're only shadows. They're only reflections of the image. They are not the fullness of the image itself. But on the day that we see Jesus Christ face to face, we will finally know fully, just like we have been fully known. And the partial, it will have passed away. And the perfect is going to have come. And so that full joy from abiding in the true vine, it's only going to come when we see him face to face. But yes, there is still joy in abiding in him here and now too. Because abiding, it grows fruit. And that's what fulfills our purpose. It's a mandate that goes all the way back to Genesis. Be fruitful and multiply. Abiding in who we know and what we know about who we know, it's going to grow fruit. And it's going to be the fruit that identifies us with the true vine. So the fruit of love and joy and peace. And these are three areas that Jesus has already addressed specifically on this last night together with his disciples. It'll be fruit like patience, something he demonstrated time and again as he went over and over the same lessons with that same group of men. Kindness, something that everyone who encountered him, they encountered the kindness of God. Goodness. When Jesus was charged, the only charge that they could make stick on him was the charge of blasphemy, of claiming to be God. Faithfulness. He walked the path of obedience even to death to show us the faithful, steadfast, enduring love of God. Gentleness. We see this particularly in his dealings with women and children and the sick and the weak, and self-control. He contained in himself the fullness of God, and yet he restrained that power for our sake. Fruit that characterized the life of the true vine, it's going to start to grow in our lives. And it's going to become increasingly evident as we abide in him and his words abide in us. And so we're going to become like those old couples that I like to watch. The more time we spend together, the more we begin to look like each other and behave like each other. In the case of us and Jesus, it's just a one-way street. We only become more and more like him. But how neat is that going to be? And when we abide like this, we can ask our Father anything and we can know it's going to be done. So does that mean every prayer is going to be answered exactly like we want? No. But abiding in the vine, making space for his words to abide in us, it grows us in this depth of relationship and it aligns our desires. It changes our requests. And so more and more we trust the vine dresser and we pray for his will to be done. And so then instead of focusing only on our bad behaviors and how to reform them, we abide in the love and the truth and the grace of Christ. And then our desires change and we want to cultivate this right relationship. We realize that our obedience, it doesn't make us Jesus's friends. It just shows that we are his friends. And so this deeper that we grow into this relationship, the more confidence that we have in the one that we're in relationship with, the more naturally we'll be growing in our obedience as well. We trust and obey because we truly understand what we know. We know the one who loves us and cares for us, so we trust that he is going to bring fruit in the way that he sees fit. And we know that it's his glory that's at stake, not ours. And so we will trust him to defend it. And then some of those burdens that start to pile up on our shoulders as soon as we start forgetting what we're supposed to know, they're going to start rolling off our shoulders. As our trust grows, we're going to feel the beginnings of joy seep into our souls. And maybe it's not going to be the jump around crazy, can't bring me down kind of joy. Maybe it'll be more like the quiet joy that comes from this peace of knowing what we know, trusting what we can't see, yet all the while listening for those whispers in the quiet shadows of life, whispers of love that hint at the fullness that is to come. Living like that is going to get us noticed. It's going to attract attention and it's going to raise questions. Abiding in the vine, it grows us to look more like God, and that's how we show him to the world. And I've heard those whispers in these shadowlands, and the closer that I grow in my relationship with Christ, the more joy will bubble up in me in these unexpected times and places. And I know what I know. I know whom I have believed in. I am persuaded that he's able to keep what I've committed to him until that day, until the day that I will know and see and feel fully, the day that all the evidence has been pointing to, all the clues have been leading to, until the day that this case, it is blown wide open in the courts of heaven, and all people of all time, they are going to see and they are going to know that the Lion of Judah, he is the Lamb that was slain. He is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and those who are with him, those who have abided in the true vine, they are finally going to experience the joy of everlasting celebration in his presence. Let's pray. And I'm going to be praying the words from Psalms 80 as we close today. Please listen, O Shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph's descendants like a flock. O God, enthroned above the cherubim, display your radiant glory. Show us your mighty power. Come to rescue us. Turn us again to yourself, O God, and make your face shine down upon us. Only then will we be saved. Look down from heaven and see our plight. Take care of this grapevine that you yourself have planted, this son that you raised for yourself. Strengthen the man that you love, the son of your choice. Then we will never abandon you again. Revive us so that we can call on your name once more. Turn us again to yourself, O Lord God of heaven's armies. Make your face shine down upon us. Only then will we be saved. Thank you, dear Father, that you did strengthen the man that you love, the son of your choice, your very own son, and that through him you showed us your power and your glory. You rescued us, and it's only through him that we are saved. You did look down from heaven, and you did see our plight. And through your Son, you turned us to yourself. And so we give you all the praise and the honor and the glory. Amen.